Hello again, Roy.RealEstate here with Coldwell Banker Legacy in San Angelo. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the different eras of homes and kind of some of the changes over time. It's kind of interesting stuff, and just kind of, if you see a little bit of the history, it helps you when you're getting ready to look for a house. A lot of times your budget determines the era of home you're going to get, so sometimes there's not a lot you can do about it, but it gives you something to kind of think about as you're going through the process and knowing some of the changes and how they might affect you or the work you need to do in the future. So first off, just a caveat that the older a home is, typically the more things have changed since it was built. I mean, that's pretty common knowledge, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you can see it at first glance, but it affects everything. So the older the house is, the less the things I'm saying may be true, because I may tell you something that was common to that era, but something has changed. This house has had that redone or whatever. So as we go through this, that'll be somewhat apparent. And obviously the price level of the house when it was originally built will affect things. You know, the size, the house that was built larger and very nice even a long time ago is going to have some features that even the newer houses don't have today. So it's just kind of, you know, there's lots of variables in it, but just kind of give you a general idea. Kind of starting in the 40s and 50s, typically those type of houses, they were pretty much rectangular. If they had 3 bedrooms, typically they were all on one end. There was 1 bathroom, and that was pretty common, you know, and they had wood siding generally on the outside. So that was pretty common, and as you got into the 60s, that kind of started to change a little. Somewhere in the later 60s is when you saw the split bedrooms, where there was 1 bedroom on one end of the house, the master, and then the kids' bedrooms on the other end of the house. And that's also when you started to see either a half bath or even a full bath, either attached to the master or right next door to it. So that was a big change in just how society was doing things at the time. And just the thought of having a private bathroom, you know, that's so normal in newer construction today that just wasn't a thing back then. So that's something to be aware of. You really got to get up into the 60s and stuff. A lot of those, 50s and 60s, you'll have 1.5 baths, or sometimes you get into 2. So unless, again, they've been updated. So that was kind of interesting. They tended to be fairly rectangular. So in the later 60s, you started to see the split bedrooms, and another fabulous invention came out in the late 60s, and that's popcorn ceilings. Really, popcorn ceilings were an amazing invention because the original, it was for acoustical reasons. It was a noise deadening. That was the reason they put popcorn on the ceilings. It wasn't ever for looks, it was always ugly, but it did affect the noise. And houses through that era, even those 40s and 50s also, but up through the 60s and 70s, typically had 8-foot ceilings. They were pretty low ranch style houses, at least in this part of the world. And so they were, the roof, the ceiling was down close to you, and so that sound deadening effect of the popcorn was pretty handy. But as you get into the 70s, you started to see more brick on the outside of homes, even some stone and stuff, but that, again, rock has always been more expensive. So even today, unless it's a real high-end house, typically it's used more as of an accent instead of being the primary thing. So then when you got into the 80s, you started seeing some more open. You saw the vaulted ceilings and things like that were really nice. It's been really interesting the last probably 15 years, since 2000-ish, is what's happened in master bathrooms. I mean, the master bathrooms, the square footage devoted to master bathrooms and closets is phenomenal today. And that's one of the huge differences. Those early houses had very small closets, and particularly in the masters. The other rooms, as the square footages have gone up, but most of that square footage increase you've seen from the 40s to nowadays was gone into the living areas and the master bedroom and bathroom. So that's kind of just an interesting feature of what's happened over the years. So if you're looking for lots of closet space, particularly in the master, if you want a big fancy master bathroom, then you're probably going to have to look at a house that's been built in the last 10 or 15 years. That's become a much bigger issue. In fact, the pendulum has swung so far, you got to think at some point there's just so many square feet devoted to bathrooms. Like, what are we going to do as we move forward? So you started to see in the late 90s, and then since then, you see more of the higher pitched roofs, more attic space, and just kind of the changes the look of the house. Not that low slung ranch style house that we had was more common around here in the 70s and 80s. And that changed the looks of things too. One of the things you've also started to see, and this is more so in the last 10 years, it's smaller lots. You know, you go back to the 60s through the 80s, the lots tended to be fairly good sized. So now even the larger houses, which are typically being built, are built on smaller lots. So this can be a positive or a negative. If you don't want to care for a big yard, it's a huge positive. But if you've got kids, you're at that age, that stage of life, you've got kids and you want a yard and stuff like that, then that's a factor to consider. So that's really a trend lately. It's moving to a lot smaller lots. It lowers the cost as well because you don't have as much land. They can put more houses on the same amount of land. Your neighbors are closer. There's some other obvious disadvantages there. So it's just a matter of what you're looking for again. So anyway, those are the things. I mean, there's always outliers in this. There's custom built houses all through all these eras that have had some different things. Some people had a lot of foresight and some people didn't. Another thing to think about is insulation and windows. You know, up through the 60s, there was very little insulation. You had a lot of single pane windows. Many of those have been replaced, but a lot of them haven't. Putting insulation back in is really difficult to do unless you're doing a major remodel on the house, you know, pulling some of the wall stuff off, wall coverings, sheetrock and whatnot. So then you can go back and insulate it. The plumbing, electrical, obviously, the standards have changed and, you know, the materials they use today are a lot better. So if those have been updated, that's always a positive. And a lot of those things really have gotten better on the new houses. There's some of the things that may or may not be better. It's a preference thing. It's a trend that you may like or not like. But typically the plumbing, the electrical, those type of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, all those things have really improved how well we understand how they work and the materials and how they function. So those tend to be better. And as a general rule, you'll tend to have less maintenance with a newer house. So something to factor into your variables there as well. So a little bit of tidbits, trying to not get too much into detail because it's more or less just trends you see over the years, but some thoughts there. If you got any questions, give me a call. Roy.RealEstate, 325-268-0775. Thank you.